I'm not a good person. There's really no other way for me to say that. I'm okay with that at this point in my life. I was dealt a rough hand my entire life, and unfortunately, I played the hand I was given. I'm not looking for sympathy either. It is what it is. So with that being said, I hope you understand why I'm telling this story anonymously. It's hard to believe now, but this story I'm about to tell happened to me almost 20 years ago. Back in the early 2000s, I was the worst I'd ever been. I was constantly getting into trouble. You name it, robbery, fighting, Grand Theft Auto, the list goes on. There was this one horrible night where I came awfully close to getting what I deserved. Back then, there was about a 6-month period when I played this little game. I would drive to a different small town in the middle of nowhere every couple of days. Because I never stayed in one place long, finding these little towns was very easy. There's literally a countless number of small towns in the United States. When I arrived in these towns, I would spend a little bit of time scouting the area and finding an old couple. My target couple would always be old and frail looking. It's hard to explain, but they would also have to seem weak. I know that seems vague, but part of my grift relied on them being mentally weak in addition to being physically weak. Once I found my ideal candidate, I would wait until it got good and dark, but not too late. Usually around 9 p.m. was my go time. That's when I would frantically show up on these old people's doorsteps begging for help. I would point to my car in the road and claim that it died. I would have some flimsy excuse, like my wife was in the hospital about to give birth, and I needed a phone immediately to call for help. Once the old folks would invite me inside, I would tie them up and rob them blind. I'd never steal anything sentimental, and I just did my absolute best not to hurt the old people. Harming them was never part of the game. I just wanted to rob them. Now that you all know how much of a trash bag of a human being that I was, I'll tell you about the night when this little game almost ended my life. It started just like all the others. I found my targets and got ready for the robbery. I pulled my car in front of the house a little after 9 p.m. I planned on telling the old couple my usual line, that my wife was pregnant and the car died. Sadly, this line worked every time. The location is important in this story, so I'll try to describe it the best I can. The house was basically the only house on this road. I think the next closest house was about a 3-minute drive. The front of the house was basically on the road. There wasn't much of a driveway. They had one old pickup truck, but that was parked on the side of the house in the grass. Behind the house were woods as far as you can see. Knowing the area was an important part of my grift because if things went south, I needed to know what the best way out could be. Since this house didn't really have much of a front yard or driveway, my escape plan was an easy one. At least I thought it would be. I put on my game face and ran to the door. I started knocking and screaming for help. An old woman answered the door. She didn't look scared or concerned in the slightest. With almost no sense of urgency, she asked what the problem was. I started frantically explaining that my wife was in the hospital about to give birth to our first child and my car broke down. I needed to call someone for help. The woman smiled. It was a rough smile. There weren't many teeth. She grabbed my shoulder and told me to come in. The woman's demeanor was giving me pause. Usually the people I'm robbing at this point are freaking out and trying to help any way they can, but not this woman. She cheerfully guided me in and told me to stand in the living room, which was the room just right of the front door. In a creepy voice, she told me not to worry and that I'll be okay. It was right then that this giant man walked into the room. I'm exaggerating a bit when I say giant, but he was huge. I would guess well over 6 feet tall and easily 400 pounds. He had a bushy black beard that stuck out from his face about 3 inches, but the two most notable things about this large man were that he was holding a hunting rifle in his hand, and he was not old. This man couldn't have been more than 25 or maybe 30 years old. Younger people were not as susceptible to my game, so this was a major oversight on my part. The woman spoke up and told me that this was her son, and he'd go out and take a look at my car. Before I could even get a word out, she shouted Hank at the top of her lungs. She started telling me that her husband Hank is in the other room, and he'd for sure help me. She continued yelling for Hank, and at the same time, her son went outside. I started to panic a bit because her son would clearly see that my car is fine, and I didn't think just rushing out was the best idea since he was walking around with that rifle in his hands. Hank limped into the living room where I was standing, and then he just stared at me. The old woman said something about helping me, and Hank just mumbled something under his breath. This is when I noticed the smell. Everything happened so fast once I got to the door that I didn't realize the smell inside the house was bad. Like really, really bad. It wasn't the smell of body odor, it was something else. Something worse. And that's when I decided it's time to go. I started creeping toward the door, and I saw Hank mirroring my movements toward the door. The old woman was also creeping closer to me and asking where I was going. She kept asking me what was wrong and asking if I still wanted their help. I made up a stupid lie and told them I needed to get something out of my car. Both of them were closing in on me. When I was about 6 feet from the front door, I made a hard move and sprinted the rest of the way. As I ran, I felt Hank attempt to grab me, but thankfully, my youth allowed me to slip away quickly. For a split second, I forgot about their son outside. That intense moment inside had my blood pumping, and leaving was the only thing on my mind. When I got to the car, I noticed that all 4 tires had been completely deflated. As I ran closer and inspected the tires, I could easily tell that they were slashed. I didn't know what to do or what was going on. I didn't see their son, but I heard Hank yell from the house that I was outside and that I couldn't have gotten far. I decided to run into the woods. I know that's like a cliche, but hiding in the cover of darkness in the woods seems like a better idea than running on an open road. I sprinted deep into the woods for a minute or two, and then hid behind a big tree to catch my breath. I got down to the ground and did my best to listen for footsteps. Not long after, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming toward me. I couldn't move because that would clearly bring attention to my hiding spot. I was holding my breath and trying my best not to move a single muscle. The footsteps were getting louder, and they felt like they were on top of me. And I looked to my side, and 2 feet from my head was the old couple's son walking by me, swinging the hunting rifle in his hand. I think the only reason he didn't hear me was because of the loud sound of his heavy footsteps. I could feel myself shaking as he stepped by me. Somehow, he didn't see me and just continued walking in the dark. I waited for him to get out of sight, and then I basically crawled out of the woods. When I got back to the house, I still snuck quietly back to my car. I could see in the windows of the house that the old woman was just standing there looking outside toward the woods. Somehow, she didn't see me. I didn't see Hank, which led me to believe that he must have been in the woods also. I decided to do the stupidest thing ever, and I still can't believe it worked. I got into my car with its flat tires, and I essentially rolled down the street as far as I could before the tires were completely dead. Once I could hear them grinding on the ground, I got out of my car and ran as fast as I could back to the town. It took me a while, but I made it. I eventually got someone to tow the car out of there, and I didn't tell them or any police about the old people. I didn't want anybody to dig too deep into my life. Once I got away and got the car towed, I didn't want to think about those people ever again. I don't really know for sure what happened that night. I know what I felt and I know what I saw. The body language, the smell, the slashed tires, just everything adds up to something bad. I found this experience to be a middle finger of karma from the universe. I did somewhat clean up my act soon after this experience, but I definitely didn't become a saint. I'm still a bad person from my past. I'm just not as bad as I used to be, and I do feel regretful and remorseful for a lot of what I've done. Honestly though, I think whatever those people were up to was far worse than whatever I was out there doing. I've never shared this story before in its entirety because I don't like the way it makes me look. Basically, I spent a little over a year being a criminal. I worked as an overnight security guard for this large strip mall in my hometown. For obvious reasons, I'm not going to mention the name of my hometown, the mall, or anything else that could potentially get me in trouble. For the first few months, I took my job very seriously. Once I had the lay of the land, I realized how insanely boring my job was. At first, it was like a dream job. I'm a night owl, so staying up all night is nothing new. I also don't love people, and this job had about zero human interaction. I would monitor the security cameras, make a few nightly walks around the mall, and basically listen to podcasts or watch shows on my phone all night. This honestly got old a lot quicker than I thought it would. It was the boredom that got to me. I needed something to give me a little spice in my life. I spent most of my life to this point never getting into trouble. I wasn't a bad kid, and for all my adult life to this point, I had never gotten as much as a traffic ticket. One night, after monitoring the cameras, I realized that one of the back doors didn't have a camera near it. I don't know how that could ever happen, but I was happy it did. I should explain the layout of this strip mall. Just like any other strip mall, the stores are all lined up in the front. What was cool about this mall was that behind every store was a large back room that connected every store to the security office. From the office, I had access to every store, so even though the front door of a store would be locked, I could still gain access from the back room. After discovering that back door with no camera, it got me thinking. I wondered where all the other blind spots were. I started paying closer attention to the cameras and making notes of all the blind spots I could find. When I would make my nightly walks, I would go to some of these blind spots and do something stupid like a dance move, and then when I got back to the office, I would play the tape back and see if you could see me dancing. If you couldn't see me, then I knew the spot was blind, and I made a note in my phone of the exact location. Once I noted every blind spot, the boredom set in again. I started to think of ways I could utilize these blind spots with the back door. I started with something small. I went to one of the stores and took a hat that was on a rack in a blind spot. I opened the back door and put the hat in a box outside the door. When I left that morning, I drove around back and took the box. The next night, when I showed up, I played the tape back from when I took the hat, and when I left, there was no video at all of me. I had convinced myself that I had perfected the art of stealing just like that, and that's exactly what I did for a long time. At some point during the shift, I would just steal something because I could. Sometimes it would be something small like a cheap t-shirt, and other times it would be something far more valuable like an expensive pair of sneakers. I realized that these stores obviously have inventory, so I was careful and methodical with what I stole. I apologize for the long setup, but I think it's necessary to understand my job and what I was doing at this job for full context. One night while I was making my rounds, I heard something. This was the first time anything of note ever happened. The only crime that ever happened on my watch was being committed by me. The noise sounded like children laughing. I pulled out my flashlight and searched the area. I didn't see anyone. I could hear the laughter all around me, and what sounded like whispers, but the whispers were incoherent. I started yelling for them to come out, but there was nothing. I could hear the movement and laughing, but I couldn't see anything. The worst part of all of this was that it was all around me, and I still couldn't see anything. I felt crazy. I shouted that I was going to call the police, like the tough security guard that I was, and the laughing stopped for a second, but then it started again. I ran out of the store and back to the office. I pulled up the tape and saw nothing. All you can see in the security footage is me waving the flashlight around like an idiot and yelling at nothing. I didn't call the police because my plan was to catch these kids when they tried to escape. I may know where all the blind spots are, but I know there's no way these kids would know. I pulled up all the camera feeds for that store and watched them all night, and surprisingly, I saw nothing for the entire evening. Close to dawn, I went back to the store and walked around, and I saw no evidence of any kids or break-ins. I chalked this up to my mind playing tricks on me and just decided to move past it. I had the next 2 nights off. When I went back to work, I asked the guy who was leaving as I was punching in if anything weird happened the last 2 nights, to which he said no. That night, I decided I was going to check out that store again and maybe help myself to a little something. When I got to the store around 3 in the morning, I made my way to the sneaker section, and as I grabbed a pair of new Vans, I heard something swoosh by me. I froze because any noise you're not expecting is alarming in this situation. I shouted, "Who's there?" but the only response I got was the taunting laughter again. I ran out of the aisle, still holding onto the Vans in my hands. Once again, I was shining the flashlight all over the store, and again, I didn't see anything. I was shouting and moving around erratically. I was still holding the sneakers in one hand and holding the flashlight with the other as I aggressively walked through the store. I made my way to one of the corners of the store, and then I saw something move from the corner of my eye. I looked down the aisle to my left, and I shouted. I saw a small figure come out from the back of the aisle and wave at me. I tried shining my flashlight, but they were too far away. It just looked like a dark shadow. I told them to stay there, and I started to run towards them. I took my eyes off the shadow for 1 second, and they were gone. I started running around that area like a crazy person shouting, but I couldn't see them again. I could still hear the laughter and running all around me, though. Then I heard one of the voices, clear as can be, say my full name. I had about enough at that point. I wanted no part of being in this store anymore. I ran back to the security office. I didn't even realize through all this confusion, I still had the Vans in my hand. I set them down in the office and told myself I would bring them back in the morning. Right now, I just wanted to pull up the footage and catch whoever these kids were that were messing with me. I watched every second of the feed, and not once can you see anything other than me running around. I looked insane. The craziest part is that there's a camera that faces down the aisle where I saw the kid, but on the footage you can't see anyone. I don't know if it was just too dark or what, but there was no sign of anyone. That morning when my supervisor showed up, I told her all about the previous night and the night from 2 days ago. She pulled up the footage and only saw me running around like an idiot. She also saw the vans in the office and questioned why I had them in the first place. I didn't have a real answer for her. I could tell she was more suspicious of me. She told me that some of the stores had reported some theft and that the vans in my office and my erratic behavior didn't look good. I kept trying to tell her that I wasn't being erratic and that there was someone in the store. I told her that they even knew my name and she didn't believe me. She basically accused me of stealing right there, and I denied it. I quit at that moment because I felt like if I didn't work there anymore, I couldn't get in trouble for stealing. I don't know why I thought that. They ended up doing an investigation for the theft, not the potential intruders that I reported. Somehow, I didn't get caught and nobody was arrested. When I think about this experience, I think that maybe I'm crazy and that I was seeing things that weren't there. I also don't have any history of seeing or hearing things like this, and I haven't heard or seen anything since then. I know what I saw. I know I can't prove it, and I know it sounds insane, but I know I saw someone standing there. I know someone was messing with me. I just can't believe they knew my name. Dear Mr. Nightmare, I've been watching your videos for many years now. Some of the stories you've narrated have reminded me of myself and something I've done in the past. I'm not proud of it, but I think it would be interesting for your viewers to hear a story from the quote, bad guy's perspective. For that reason, I'll obviously choose to stay anonymous. So, I wouldn't say I was a bad person before this. I mostly kept to myself, went to class, did what I had to do, and went home. I've always been socially awkward, and I didn't really have friends, but it never bothered me that much because that was normal to me in my school days. And then one day, I got paired with a girl for a presentation in one of my classes. I'll call her Emily. She was normal and easy to talk to, the kind of person who made group work enjoyable. The first time we met up in the library, we went over the outline for about an hour, but I found myself paying attention to things that had nothing to do with the project. Small things about her and the way she talked and wrote. I realized instantly I had a thing for her. After that, we exchanged numbers to stay in touch about the presentation, and that should have been the end of it. That night, I looked her up online. It wasn't hard to find her after saving her number so I could see her Snapchat profile through contacts, which is how I got her name. Within a few minutes, I had her Instagram, and from there, it just kept going. I thought it was harmless. I was just curious because honestly, this was the only real female interaction I had for a long time, and I was infatuated. I scrolled through her photos. I saw where she went, who she spent time with, and I started noticing details in the background that I could kind of piece together. It turned into me checking her accounts constantly, like it had become part of my routine. Within a few days, I had a pretty good idea of what neighborhood she lived in. I took things too far when I looked up how to find someone's address with their phone number, and I realized how easy it is. When I found it, I drove past her house once, then I circled back and slowed down. There was a light on upstairs, and I wondered if it was her bedroom. I noticed the red car parked in front of the house that I was pretty sure was hers because it had a parking sticker for our college on the side window. I should have stopped there, but I got addicted to stalking this girl. It turned into something I did a couple nights a week. I always stayed in the car and told myself I wasn't crossing a line, even though I clearly already had. One night I was parked a little further down the street and noticed the blinds in the upstairs window shift a little bit. I saw someone peering out the window. I couldn't tell if it was her, but it was definitely someone peering out. I started freaking out, thinking she or a family member noticed me and was onto me. I left right away, perhaps making it more suspicious. And the whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day in class, Emily acted completely normal, but at one point, she had a comment that made my heart drop. She made a subtle comment about some of the boys at the school being creepy, and that she was dealing with a stalker situation. I didn't ask her to go deeper into it, because I was terrified to know if she was referring to me. After that, I stopped going near her house. I stopped checking her profile as much too. I was convinced she might have caught on, and I didn't want to push it further. Now here's where things really started messing with my head. At this time, I was living in my grandparents' house. That was handed down to my parents after they both passed, and I still do live here. So I was alone. I was in my room at like 9 o'clock at night, and and I heard something outside, like a light tap against the window. I don't mean someone ominously tapping their finger on the glass.
I mean, it sounded like someone brushing up against the glass as if trying to look inside.
I was too scared to go look, though. The next night, it happened again. But this time, it sounded like it was coming from a different side of the house. This was when I knew it wasn't a coincidence. And it only got worse. I started seeing shapes through the blinds, someone standing too close to the window. It was never clear enough to see who it was, just enough to know that there was a person or multiple people circling my house. I stopped opening the blinds completely after that. I stayed in my room with the door locked and the lights off. This went on for days. I stopped going to class entirely. I barely left my room unless I had to. There was a person or group of people trying to see if I was home. I started using my limited money to have any food or necessities delivered because I didn't want to leave the house. Every sound made me feel like someone was right outside. During all of this, Emily started texting me asking if I was okay since I hadn't shown up to class or responded about the project. I didn't answer right away, but eventually I replied and told her I was sorry and asked her to please stop sending people to my house. As soon as I sent it, I regretted it. Her response came a few minutes later. The typing bubble came up, then disappeared, then came up, then disappeared. I watched the whole time as she was definitely trying to figure out how to respond. When she did, she responded confused and concerned, asking what I was talking about. That was the moment it really hit me that maybe she had nothing to do with any of this. I tried to play it off like I sent that message to the wrong person, and she surprisingly didn't question it after that, but the damage was already done in my head. That night was the worst it had been. It was late, and I was sitting on my bed in the dark when the doorbell rang. It came out of nowhere and made my heart jump. I lay still for a few seconds before getting up and walking downstairs with all the lights still off. Yes, I was living in darkness for days. I stood near the door without opening it, just to listen. The person on the other side must have heard me, because they asked me to open the door. Not asked, they told me to. I told them I didn't order anything. The tone on the other side got more aggressive, telling me to open the door like it wasn't a request anymore. I didn't respond. I just backed away and went upstairs as quietly as I could. Then I locked myself in my room. They spammed the doorbell for a solid minute. I was hiding in my bed like a coward. After a minute or two, they stopped. I went to stay with my parents for a few days, not telling them the reason, because I didn't want to explain my creepy actions. The rest of my time working with Emily in class was very awkward. I never found out if she sent her family or friends or whoever to my house. If it wasn't her, I don't know who it could have been. Regardless, I never went to her house again or stalked her page again. Whoever was coming to my house lost interest after I spent like 5 days at my parents' house. I got a taste of my own medicine, and I never want that to happen again. 2 years ago, I was what you would call lost in life. I didn't have any direction. I worked dead-end jobs, had no relationships, and just blindly went through life. Something was missing in my life. I tried filling the void with a lot of different fixes, but I was always left feeling empty. Until one day, I did something strange. Something that gave me such a rush. I trespassed into a home in my neighborhood. Don't worry, I know how sketchy this is. Basically, I knew the owners of the house, and I knew they were at work that day. Earlier that morning, they had some workers go to their house to do some kind of construction project. I just happened to see them leave for lunch when I was on a walk. I don't know what came over me, but I went to the front door and checked if it was locked, and it wasn't. I walked inside and just took a self-tour of their home. This rush of being inside someone else's house was exhilarating. I stayed at their house for several minutes and then left before the construction crew came back. After that day, I started breaking into homes I knew were empty just for the thrill of it. I never took anything. I would just walk around and observe people's living spaces. I would get this eerie rush standing in a room. Just the feeling of knowing I was there and the person had no idea. It was an amazing feeling for me. But just like every other fix in my life, this started to get old as well. That eerie rush eventually just disappeared. Knowing I was in the house soon became not enough. I needed more. I started calling myself a reverse thief. I would go into these homes and leave something behind, something inconspicuous. Even though I would never see the reaction with my own eyes, I would fantasize about their reactions. For example, one time I left a folded blanket on a living room couch. a blanket that I brought with me, not one that the owners already had in the house. The idea of the conversations that would start made me almost giddy. I was like a small child on Christmas. In hindsight, I know how twisted this is. If I ever came home and saw something like that, I would probably freak out and call the cops. This reverse thief thing I was doing became my life. I would literally base my entire week around it. I started to people watch intensely. Once I had an idea of their schedule, I would locate the home and find a weak area to enter the house when the owners weren't home. You'd be surprised how many people have a key under a doormat or a fake rock thing that holds a spare key. It was only a matter of time before I started becoming a real terror. I started getting really dark. To give you an idea of how messed up I was, I'll share this little story. One time, I left a big pink hair tie and an eyeshadow pencil in the bathroom of a house. I hid in a bush on the side of the house and waited for the couple to get home from work. I needed to hear this reaction. The woman got home first, and she was not pleased. Her husband got home shortly after, and they began to fight. He obviously had no idea what she was talking about, but the evidence was there. Can you imagine coming home and finding something like that? I'm sure it wouldn't end well for anyone. I became this mischievous little monster, and I loved it. It was only a matter of time before I got a taste of my own medicine. One afternoon, when I got home from work, I noticed something on my counter in the kitchen. It was a little vase with one small yellow flower. This is for sure something that wasn't there when I left that morning. Next to the vase was a note. It was written in cursive and said, "We know it was you." I felt sick. I checked all my locks, and everything appeared to be locked up. I couldn't think of anyone who could have done this to me. I was always so careful not to leave a trail. I went to my bedroom that night and locked the door. Calling the cops wasn't an option because if this person actually knew who I was, they could ruin me. I thought about going back to my parents' house, but that was a headache I didn't want to deal with. That night, I did some soul searching. I decided it was time to end my reverse thief charade. I woke up in the morning expecting to have another surprise. Thankfully, there was nothing. I ran some errands, and when I got back home, I wasn't so lucky. This time, I did have another surprise waiting for me. Once again on the counter was a note accompanied by a dead bird. The note said, "We're coming for you." At that moment, I ran to the bedroom and started packing a bag. I was going to stay at my parents' house until I could figure out a plan. When I got to the room, I heard something shuffling. It wasn't coming from the room. I heard something from the vent. I went over and put my ear to the vent that was on the ground. There was movement coming from downstairs in the basement. There was no doubt in my mind that someone was down there. While listening, I could hear voices. They were too muffled to understand what they were saying. At least, I thought they were voices. I slowly got up. I was trying not to make any noise, even though I had already been home for several minutes. I grabbed my bag and slowly made my way to the door. Each step I took, I felt like I was making a lot of noise. Every time I thought I heard something, I would freeze. Once I realized it was nothing, I would continue my slow walk. I got to the front door, which was located right next to the door that led to the basement. My curiosity was killing me. I wanted to know who was messing with me and who was potentially in my house. I opened the basement door. I could hear quiet voices talking. I was sure that they were voices now. As I took one step onto the creaky wooden stairs, I heard a loud shh. I shouted down the stairs, but nobody shouted back. I knew I heard voices literally 3 seconds ago. I was too scared to go down and look, especially if there were more than one person. I turned around and slammed the basement door. I crept out of the house quietly. I got in my car and I kept looking back at the house to see if anyone followed me, but nobody ever did. I drove to my parents' house and told them I needed to stay there for a few days because the landlord at my place was fixing some plumbing issues. I stayed at my parents' house for a week. After making it that long without any more weird gifts or notes, I thought it might be safe to go back to my house and see if anyone was still there. While I was staying at my parents' house, I also contacted my landlord and asked if I could get out of my lease a month early, which he agreed to. I planned on staying at my parents' house for the next month while I packed everything up, just in case these visitors came back. When I got back to the house to start packing things, the first thing I noticed was that the door was unlocked and wide open. I know I didn't lock it when I left, but I definitely closed it. The next thing I noticed was that they left several more gifts in the kitchen. Another dead bird, some more flowers, and a little toy car that looked just like my car. I went to the bedroom and listened intently to the vent. I didn't hear anything. So I went to the basement door, opened it, and started screaming down there. No noise at all. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case and went to the basement. Nobody was there. I felt a brief moment of relief. I thought to myself, maybe they figured I left for good, and because of that, they left. At least that's what I hoped. I wasn't going to take any chances, though. I grabbed a few essential things and ran to my car. I just didn't want to be in there anymore. Since I had a month to move out, grabbing everything right now was a waste of time. I reversed out of the driveway, and as I put the car in drive, I saw something. Directly across the street was an older couple standing there. Not super old, they were like in their 50s or 60s. These were two people whom I've never seen before, which wouldn't be weird on its own. What made it weird was that the older woman waved to me, and I noticed a small, yellow flower in her hand. It looked like the same type of flower that was left in my kitchen. The man next to her didn't do anything. He just stood there and watched me. I didn't engage with him at all. I stepped on the gas and drove away. I looked in the mirror one time as I sped down the street, and I could see them still looking in my direction. When I was driving back to my parents' house, I took a roundabout way. I didn't see them follow me, but I was paranoid now. I spent the next few weeks afraid of my own shadow. Every noise made me jump. Every person who got too close, I thought they were trying to grab me. I can say that this experience changed me for sure. That day I got that first flower was the end of my reverse thievery. To this day, I have never been caught. But even more disturbing to me is that I still have no idea who broke into my home and why. If it were that older couple, I can honestly say I have no idea who they were. The only thing I can say for sure is that crime doesn't pay, because eventually, you always get what's coming to you, one way or another.